Hello and welcome back to the Atlas Agency, a channel all about Arkham Horror the card game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host Brandon, and in this video I'll be sharing my thoughts on the new scenario in Threads of Fate, the first Mythos pack of the Forgotten Age cycle. Threads of Fate brings us the third scenario in the Forgotten Age campaign, following up on the two contained in the campaign's deluxe box. In my video on that deluxe box, I talked about how both of its scenarios were heavily centered around the new mechanics of the Forgotten Age cycle, especially the Explore action, the Supplies list, and the Vengeance keyword. Well, Threads of Fate takes a big step back, not only from the setting of the deluxe box, trading the jungle environment of the previous scenarios for the familiar comforts of good old Arkham, but also from the deluxe's gameplay and mechanics. Threads is, I think, a much more generic Arkham scenario, with gameplay that could probably feel at home in just about any Arkham campaign, as long as you rescanned the plot points. It even draws from some very familiar scenario and encounter cards from the core set. Now for me, this isn't a negative. I was somewhat critical of the deluxe box for having two scenarios that felt a little too similar, so I think it's great that Threads of Fate gives us a reprieve and doesn't immediately dip back into those same mechanics. That isn't to say that Threads of Fate is bland or doesn't craft its own identity. I think it does. It's just an identity that isn't bound up in the mechanics that have so far defined this campaign. So the main hook in Threads of Fate is that the scenario has not one, not two, but three different act decks for the investigators to progress through, with each of those decks representing a different thread of the Forgotten Age story. So you have three different investigations that can be pursued in whatever order you choose, and you can even jump back and forth between them as you play. On top of giving you that freedom to decide which goals to pursue, the scenario also offers a really nice amount of variety within each of these decks. Each of the act decks gets adjusted pretty significantly based on the decisions the players have made, so there's a lot of variation in how things can play out. There were elements that were really important in my first playthrough that were completely absent in my second, replaced by other elements that hadn't appeared the first time. In total, there are 24 different act cards in Threads of Fate. That's 8 per thread, and in a given playthrough you might see just 3 of the 8 for each thread. So there's a lot of variety for you to appreciate as you replay threads, and it's not the sort of low-level variety that we often see where there are just 2 different versions of the same location with slightly different abilities. It's deeper than that. There are entire plots and challenges you may or may not see in a given play, or that may resolve in different ways from play to play. After 4 plays, I think I still haven't seen every possibility, though I think at this point I'm pretty close. Even though Threads is mechanically distanced from the deluxe box, story-wise I think it does a great job of continuing where the Forgotten Age left off. I said earlier that Threads feels more like a generic Arkham scenario. That's true only from a gameplay perspective. The story elements in the 3 different threads that you pursue are all closely related to the events from the deluxe box, so it still feels very much like it's part of the same campaign. So what did I think of Threads of Fate? Well, I've actually enjoyed it quite a bit. Having the multiple act decks is a fun hook, and I think it was executed well in this scenario. I liked the encounter cards too. This is one of those scenarios where the encounter deck can combo off of itself in interesting ways, and even though there are a good measure of familiar encounter cards that are reused in this scenario, the interactions with the new cards I think keep things feeling fresh enough. I suspect that the majority of the audience is probably going to rank one or both of the Forgotten Age Deluxe Box scenarios higher than Threads of Fate, but for me personally, I think this might actually be my favorite scenario out of the 3 from this campaign so far. I feel a little guilty saying that, since as I said, Threads does take a break from the mechanics that have defined the Forgotten Age, but I don't know, it just clicked for me, and I think that's partly because this style of scenario usually really appeals to me. I'm fond of the checklist type scenario, where you have multiple goals and you may not necessarily get all of them completed, but you try for as many as you can. That Midnight Masks type of experience. To have that kind of checklist scenario and to also have a fuller story experience behind each item that you're checking off, I just found that to be satisfying. I do want to mention one minor annoyance that I had with Threads of Fate, and that's that I found it a little bit tedious to sort out the 24 act cards after each play. Usually when I put them away, I just separate them into piles for Act A, Act C, and Act E, and I don't worry about putting the act cards in the deck in the right numerical order until setup, but even just separating the cards into the 3 piles takes a bit of time. All 24 act cards do use the same image on their front, so when you're sorting the cards out, you have to look for the little A, C, and E letters. I really wish that each of the 3 Act decks had had its own piece of artwork, so one image for the A deck, another for the C, and another for the E. I know it's not normal practice for art to differ between Act cards within a scenario, but I think that would have made it a lot easier to quickly identify and sort these out. It would also reinforce the theme of having the 3 different threads. So that's just a small missed opportunity. Even as it is, it's worth the extra sorting labor for the variety that the scenario brings to the table, and I could probably stand to be a little more careful myself, just keeping the cards organized during play. I have a tendency to just kind of throw things around as I'm going. That's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Threads of Fate. As always, thanks for watching the Atlas Agency, and good luck in your own investigations of the Forgotten Age.